Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I am doing a-okay. Uh, yeah, just trying to live the social distancing life. So,
Sounds familiar.
yeah. So glad we got this. Um, and of course, dealing with doggos in the home. Anyone out there who's dealing with dogs or kids right now, trying to keep them out of our hair while we're trying to get work done. My two are super needy right now. So, um, but what a better time than to be needy than while we're like trying to for those that like I live alone. So I'm glad they're being super needy right now for me anyhow.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah.
let's kick things off because I was running a little behind schedule trying to get the Instagram live up and going. But for all those tuning in, thank you very much. We are actually going to be going live all of this week for Industry Exchange. So we're going to have a number of industry professionals on here to chat about some really amazing things. And Carrie Cleveland, she is the education and outreach manager at Surf Plus, so the artist safety net. And to keep up with everything related to that, you can look on their Instagram, and that's CERF Plus, Surf Plus. And visit, of course, surfplus.org for more information. So obviously there's not a single industry at the moment that like has not been affected by COVID-19. That is very clear. Independent artists, crafters, makers, freelancers have definitely taken the brunt of this blow, just by the very nature of what they're doing. So lucky for us and for much like Raw, there is, an aid and organizations whose goal is to kind of like educate and support the creative. So um, you are joining us you're in Vermont. That's correct?
Hmm.
Yeah, amazing.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and all the way across in another time zone on the other side of the world from where I am in Los Angeles, California. But yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the program, a little bit about Surf and how that kind of all works?
Sure. Yeah. And first, thank you so much for having me today and giving me this opportunity to share with the artists in your community a little bit about who we are and what we do and how we might be able to help right now, because this is such a strange, unprecedented time for all of us. And I think the thing that we've all got to do is really just keep talking to each other and letting each other know what's out there and what's available.
Yeah.
So to that end, now that I've gotten my technology landscape all figured out and can be with you, so Surf Plus, as you mentioned, we're in Montpelier, Vermont, but we are a national artist service organization serving entire units in the United States and territories. And our real focus is around helping artists build resilient careers. And our background in that and our whole structure around that is emergencies, whether it's being prepared for emergencies or then responding when they happen. And our background, just to understand why we're so focused on this, is we were founded 35 years ago by a group of artists at craft shows who noticed that they were always passing a hat for a friend who'd had a fire or a flood or an illness or an injury or some kind of really intense emergency, and formalized from there into an actual nonprofit that could provide consistent emergency relief. And then for us, the emergency preparedness side, Hurricane Katrina was a real turning point for us. We realized there was just so much that we could do to be supporting artists before an emergency even happened, and taking the things that artists, taking the stories that artists had told us and things that they learned through their own experiences and things that they were doing differently based on going through an emergency. Like we could be helping other artists take on these practices too.
Yeah.
And so just started making that have equal weight in our programming as the emergency relief. It's just as vital.
Yeah, first off, that's amazing. Way to go, artist, coming together and kind of like, realizing that there, is definitely something much bigger here, right? And like to be prepared ahead
Mm-hmm.
of time. And like you said, I think all communication is key. You know, talking to each other about all of the different types of programs, much like this, is, you know, what's going to keep us, you know, sort of alive, so to speak, you know.
Right.
How did you come to work with the organization? What's your specialty with them?
So my specialty in what I do with them now is I oversee education and outreach. So I'm on the program side of our work, mostly focused on that emergency preparedness side. But I will say I have been with Surf Plus for 12 years this month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And in that time, sort of worked all over the scope of what we do. I will say I started, you know, in my, I'll date myself, in my mid-20s. I I have a lifelong background in the arts that admittedly is very scattered. You know, I used to work in sculpture. I spent a couple of years as a performing tenor sax player. I have a small, teeny tiny background and experience in metalsmithing, but I'm also an admin geek.
Okay.
I am good at like the nerdy back end, like, you know, side of things, and always liked that intersection. And I'm one of those people. I need to be useful and helping folks. And so when I had been living outside of Vermont for a while. When I moved back, I had set these very specific goals for how I wanted my life in Vermont to work. And one of those goals was I want to work for an arts-based nonprofit. And just figured if I can get my foot in the door somewhere and figure out if that works for me, if it works for them, you know, that would be something I was really interested in. I found Surf Plus. They needed an office assistant, and 12 years later, I think I'm on my 5th role in the organization. And I'm continuously really impressed by the heart and the work behind this org, and I feel lucky to still be here.
Yeah, I love that. I've worked with Raw for almost a decade now in some capacity, one form or another. And yeah, I absolutely love that organizations like this exist. And to like have a job in the arts really, right, is like, you know, kind of key and educating others. So what services and resources do y'all offer? Like if somebody isn't aware of what you guys do?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different programs. The founding one, the Emergency Relief Fund, is a $3,000 grant for artists who work in craft disciplines who have had a career-threatening emergency. And craft disciplines, it's can craft in, you know, traditional folk disciplines like metals or fiber or furniture making, glass blowing, etc. The other fund-based program that we have is our Get Ready Grant program,
Okay.
which is it's 2 cycles a year of $500 grants to take on some kind of emergency preparedness or career protection measure. Again, that is around the craft criteria, but people have done some really interesting projects, whether it's metalsmiths improving the ventilation systems in their studios so they can protect their health while they're working. Or there was someone who realized that throughout their career, they'd been storing really important like documentation and images from their work in all these different formats. Like their early career work was on like slides, and then they had like old hard drives of their work, and they realized like I need to start getting this all together in one area and like getting my portfolio in some kind of central place. And so they needed some technology to help them do that. Or there are people who have used it to improve security in their studios. It's a really kind of broad strokes. What would help you improve your practice around career protection or emergency preparedness?
Yeah.
And then the broader piece that's really applicable to all studio artists, we have just this incredible trove of resources on our website around emergency preparedness. And in case that phrase emergency preparedness sounds kind of like murky or vague or like what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because it does sound like I don't know what that means kind of phrase. So it can be everything from, like I was saying, maybe you have never done an inventory of your practice before. Like you've never kind of logged like what are my assets in my business, whether that's tools or like your work itself. And where that can come in handy, say, is another resource we have on insurance for artists.
Oh,
I really encourage people to not be intimidated by the notion of having insurance as an artist, because if you're selling your work, like, you're a business, and you should be looking at business insurance or liability so that if something does happen ever, like, that's a huge resource to help you get back on your feet as quickly as possible. So I could nerd out on insurance here. I will instead just direct you to the website as the first step. In our Get Ready section, we have an insurance hub. Go there, look at what kind of resources are available. You can always email me. I'm easy to find through our website, and I'm happy to give more information. And then just other kind of facets of, whether it's preparing for certain types of emergencies based on where you live, like if you're in a hurricane-prone area, things to think about in your studio and practice. And that emergency preparedness side is really relevant to all studio-based artists.
okay, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people definitely are intimidated, like when you say insurance, especially because we, a lot of monetary involvement and things like that, but definitely think it's a good idea to, be super prepared for that. So who is eligible for the emergency relief? Is it just kind of anybody, or like who can access that resource center?
Okay, so I will say that it's not membership based at all. So it's like you don't have to have had a pre-existing relationship with us. That's not a criteria at all. So the Emergency Relief Fund is for artists working in craft disciplines, whether it's kind of a traditional folk or contemporary craft, generally in the media like glass or furniture, metals, fiber, metals, etc. And you've had a career-threatening emergency, and that for us can mean natural disaster. It could mean just, kind of a one-off flood, or say like you're in a studio building and someone sets off the sprinkler above you and floods your studio. Or it could be a health emergency. And we definitely are at the ready to respond to artists who are having health implications from COVID-19. Or, it could be a really personal emergency like a theft. Or, maybe you've had to stop your practice to care for a child who's become ill. Emergencies aren't always these things that make the news. They're sometimes really personal situations as well.
Yeah. So what's the first step an artist or maker should take, like, in applying for this aid? Are there like certain things that they should probably have like in their arsenal when they go to apply for this? Is there like certain documents that are asked for, or what, like a little bit about that process?
Yeah, and I would say some of this is applicable just to what to think about as you're applying for any kind of emergency funding, because there are a lot of funds out there right now, and some of you might be looking at a lot of different things. So the first recommendation for any fund that you're looking at is just read the guidelines really carefully. Most orgs, and we do this too, will be really clear upfront about what you're going to be asked for in an application, just so you're not looking at a form and freaking out trying to find something in real time. So you can go to the form knowing what you're going to be asked for. For us, we ask for we have a kind of two-step process. There's a basic inquiry that you fill out where we just ask you, to tell us a little bit about your career, upload a couple images of your work, and then describe your career in some way. You can kind of type out, a little narrative. If you have a resume you want to upload, that's fine, but you don't need a resume going into that. And if it turns out, just based on your questions or your answers that, you don't work in a craft discipline, the form will kind of prompt you to look at some other organizations that might be able to help. And then if you do end up being invited to apply based on that inquiry, we ask for some way of showing that you've been making your living through your work. Often the most effective way to do that is through taxes and Schedule Cs that just show that you're running a business and that's how you're earning your income.
Okay, amazing. So hopefully things you already have organized for yourself in your hand, like business file or something along those lines, one would hope.
Exactly. So if you've been focused on documentation as part of emergency preparedness, you might have that at the ready. So yeah, that's where some of that emergency prep comes in handy, is that if you find yourself in a situation where you're applying for emergency grants, you often have what you need ready to go.
Yeah, okay, amazing. So for those just tuning in, so I see some people still popping on. First off, thank you for tuning in. We have here with us Carrie Cleveland, and she's the Education and Outreach Manager for Serve Plus. So her knowledge on educational programs and emergency relief for artists, which is like, hello, like couldn't speak to any, you know, more to what's going on than right now. So what are ways for artists to, you know, get help amid this, you know, COVID-19 outbreak? Like aside from this type of fund, you know, I said, you know, I'm just curious about that process.
Yeah, so there are a couple of key pieces. So obviously there are organizations like ours. There are others, so I would encourage you to, at the very least, go to our website, which is surfplus.org, and I'll just spell that out, CERFPLUS.org. Our banner has a link to our resource list because in addition to what we have available, we're also compiling lists of other artist-focused grant opportunities, whether they're national organizations that serve, you know, different constituencies of artists, or if we hear about regional grants, like the Arizona Arts Council just opened up a grant fund on Saturday. So as we hear about things like that around the country, we're trying to compile them so that artists can just go to us and, you know, have a list. There have also been a couple really incredible crowdsourced lists recently. The arts community is just terrific in terms of banding together and pooling resources. And so there's this great list for independent creatives and freelancers. We link to that through our resources as well, and that's a crowdsourced piece that's just growing and growing continuously. And so I would say in general, in that kind of spirit, you look at whatever's available through your local arts council, whether it's, you know, a metropolitan arts council or a statewide, whatever your regional group is. See what's available locally, you know, and just honestly, I've found out about funds by Googling like Artist Emergency Relief Fund, and I found out about like little regional things I wouldn't have known about. They're out there. Like, don't be afraid of Google right now. So go to whatever organizations you know, and then but then the other piece to consider though is, you know, a lot of these funds, you know, they're only able to provide, say, maybe a $500 grant, which is excellent, but we all know that if you are really facing like losing your income right now, that's not going to make you whole.
Right.
And the basic fact of it is there's no single organization that's not going to be able to make its community whole. And so the other really important piece to know about is what's available federally. Do you mind me just like hopping right into that, because it's so important? That was
totally my next question, so go for it.
Awesome. I mean, it really is like it's important to know what's coming up with that, because there's, you know, one piece that, you know, should just be coming without you having to do anything, which is the $1,200 relief piece through the CARES Act, which will just be deposit if you filed taxes and direct deposit, gotten payments direct deposit recently, like that $1,200 should just be delivered to you, or if you've had check sent, then it should be just sent as a check. But the other components of the CARES Act do take some application and work on artists' part, but here's the really important thing to know. Like, a lot of the funding is funding that often hasn't been available to self-employed people or independent artists.
Yeah.
It is. You know, if you're self-employed, the relief in the CARES Act is available to you, and there are a couple components to it. One is the pandemic unemployment assistance. You know, I think a lot of artists know that often you're not eligible for unemployment. Unemployment has been extended to self-employed workers in the CARES Act.
Amazing.
Which means you can apply. The really key thing to know is even though it's part of the CARES Act, which is federal, it's still being administered through the states. So you do have to go through your state unemployment office.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, they're swamped right now. Getting through on the phone has been pretty impossible from what I've heard.
Yeah.
Go online, start the process there. And what's tricky is it's going to vary from state to state how it works, because it's not, like, again, it's not being administered by the federal government. So just go to your state unemployment office online, just start the process, like look at what they're saying about how to start the process, and just get it going. And then there are two forms of loans. One is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan through the Small Business Administration. You can apply, you can get $10,000 towards your business expenses. And that one, they've designed it to move quickly. Again, a lot of this is shifting and information is kind of changing daily as this rolls out. It went live April 3rd. Some banks that still don't know how it works. So I would say go through our website, just to make it easy. We have a guide to Small Business Administration and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So just can go and get a little more info. And then the third is the Payroll Protection Loan. And that's more applicable if you have staff working for you in your career,
right,
in your studio. But that's a longer term payroll loan.
Okay.
And those are the big three pieces of it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there definitely seems like there's a ton, but like good old just Google it seems to be the key. But of course, going to surfplus.org. I put .com in there. Sorry, it just automatically.
No worries.
I'm like trying to type on my phone to answer some questions because we had some questions about the website again. So again, surfplus.org is where you can find all of those resources. They have all the resources listed out for you. I had a couple of questions on here when they go to surfplus.org, where the application is for the fund for y'all.
Yeah, so, yep, we've made it really easy to find with our COVID-19 resources. So when you go to our website, there's a banner around COVID-19, and there are a couple buttons just under that header, and one of them is Get Help. So it's right there.
Get help.
And that's exactly, and so that's the one that'll take you to the inquiry form to apply for assistance. So the buttons that you see there's Get Help, but there's also resources, and that's where we're listing out other relief funds that we've heard about. There's also a link from our resources page to our cheat sheet on the Federal CARES Act. So there's more detail than what I've given you here. So if you want to get some more info, that's a great kind of like, here's what the unemployment looks like, here's what the EIDL loans look like, here's what the PPP loans look like. So you don't have to pay attention to those acronyms. You can go look later. You don't have to remember them.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's really great knowledge too. I think sometimes artists, people just forget in general. They think so largely. So those, and oftentimes states aren't necessarily talking about these things individually, like on a national level. That's all that they seem to think about. So they are thinking about the national related type funds that are out there for them. But it's good to note that like states and maybe cities and these other branches of the government have these types of services and offerings. So like look specifically to your city, look specifically to your state for what kind of funds, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if there's any kind of artist association or guild or membership group you're a part of, double check that they might be compiling resources too. Basically what I've seen is every single organization out there wants to help right now, and they're all like pooling like any list of resources they can find, for their constituency. Anyone you would normally kind of look to for information, like check.
Okay, cool. No, that's amazing. But it sounds like y'all have a very robust list of resources out there and have kind of, cut out the middleman. And a few of the people were asking too, which if you didn't tune in at the top, you don't have to previously be a member, right, to be able to apply with this through SURF. So to answer those questions that are coming through, you can just head to surfplus.org. And again, there's the help. I need help. That's where you need to go in the application process. Well, you'll just be able to go right through it, but you don't have to have previously, have been a member. So, So we're kind of wrapping up here on our time, but I just kind of want to leave it open to you. Any sort of messaging or, words of encouragement you'd like to share with the artistic community right now in this weird world we're in?
Yeah, because I am not a practicing artist myself, I'm gonna dodge a little bit and quote Andrew Simonette, who writes so eloquently for artists, because he just says it better than I do. So this is the one time I'm going to cheat and read something during this interview because it says it perfectly. And it's that I don't know what your art is, I don't know what your connections to your community are, but wherever you are, I call on you to unleash your practice as an artist and maker and reimaginer. In this crisis of meaning, you are first responders. You don't need to save the world. You only need to carry your gifts and skills into this present challenge.
That's amazing. And yes, I could not have said that any better. We are definitely, as artists, the first responders and the ones to make moves and be the conduit. And so, I definitely agree that like artists' voices, matter, now definitely more than ever. So I appreciate you, Carrie, for coming on today and sharing these amazing resources, and the work that you guys are doing at Surf Plus is incredible. And artists are definitely sort of like, on the back burner in a lot of cases, and people don't sometimes quite understand. We're misunderstood, as you would say. So it's great to know that we have organizations like y'all's to have our back and to really make sure that we are prepared for the things going in our life. So surfplus.org is where you can find that information. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. I greatly appreciate your time all the way in Vermont. I hope you're staying safe and healthy and hydrated. And for everybody that is tuned in today, make sure you're back tomorrow. We're talking all this week to some amazing industry experts. 1:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time is where you can see this face again. Don't get sick of it. We're going to have Kevin. He is the finance professor at the Berklee College of Music. So we're going to talk finances. We talk emergency preparedness funds today, finances tomorrow. Make sure you're staying tuned, up to date. Have a wonderful day, Carrie, and we'll talk with you soon. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Megan, for what you're doing, and thank you to everyone who tuned in for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, thanks. We'll have a good one, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.